This is Perspectivas Latinas, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. Chicago is one of the homes of the National Immigrant Justice Center, which offers legal services to immigrants, refugees, and people seeking asylum. They also offer legal clinics on DACA status or deferred action for childhood arrivals. Cindy Agustín and Vanessa Esparza-López are here to talk about their work and related efforts. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Great. Let's start off with you, Cindy, talking about your background and what brought you to the National Immigrant Justice Center.
Yeah, so my story is very similar to a lot of the DACA young people that we serve. I came to the United States when I was 3 years old in 1992. We came to Chicago and settled in the Back of the Arts neighborhood. I grew up knowing that I was undocumented. So in high school I did very well. I tried my best and I ended up at the University of Chicago for college. That's when I started realizing that a lot of the opportunities that were available to a lot of my friends who were US citizens weren't available to me. I also met other undocumented youth in the city who were organizing around issues of undocumented youth, and so we started trying to organize on campus as well as push for the Federal DREAM Act. A few years later, I'm still here, still involved. I've done work around community organizing, working with a lot of immigrant families, and every time I did a presentation, there would always be a family that needed legal services, legal representation, and I always referred them to the National Immigrant Justice Center. And so for me, it's amazing and it's exciting to be working there now and knowing how, where to refer them, who to talk to, and, give them as much help as I can. Even though I'm not an attorney, I know I have the support of the many attorneys at the organization who can help out many of these families.
I'm curious though, what kept you in this field? Because some folks might say, well, I'll just make something else of my life. Yeah,
I mean, right now for me, deferred action is a big change. I have a work permit, I can work legally, I have a driver's license, state ID, but my parents still don't have that opportunity. And so for me, DACA is not the end of it all. We need to keep pushing for something else. And, eventually I would also like to have some form of status that is not temporary, that is permanent, and, be able to travel outside of the U.S., visit my grandparents back in Mexico, and see how things are going there for a trip, for a vacation.
Right.
So it's just the need that is out there for the immigrant families out there.
Okay, great, thank you. And you, Vanessa, tell us about your background and what brought you to work at this place.
Sure, so I also come from an immigrant family. I was an immigrant myself, received permanent residence through my father, and eventually derived citizenship from my parents, so when I was 16 years old. And when I was an undergrad, I majored in international studies with a focus on human rights. So when I graduated, I wanted to find a more concrete way that I could take the knowledge that I had learned then and apply it to directly helping people, and especially the immigrant community that I was a part of. So I went to law school. And during law school, I was actually an intern with the National Immigrant Justice Center, and I really enjoyed my experience there. What I like about the organization is that not only does it provide the direct legal services to the population, but we also do public education. We do impact litigation to try and change the interpretation of the laws to benefit the immigrant community. We do public policy advocacy with our policy director out in Washington, D.C. So it's a really comprehensive organization, and I'm just lucky that I had the opportunity to return later on as an attorney.
Oh, great. And you just mentioned some of that. There's a huge banner of services you offer and work that you do, not just here in the United States, but internationally. But let's start off talking about the counter-trafficking project that you guys have.
Sure. So there's no project per se at this moment, but we still take trafficking cases in-house at NIJC. However, right now we don't currently have the social services component to assisting trafficking victims obtain those very necessary social services as they're trying to come out of their trafficking situation. But we definitely still have contacts with other organizations that we refer people to provide that aspect of the service while we try and get the person trafficking victim visa.
Okay, and we are the third largest urban center in the country. How big of a problem is human trafficking here in in our city and the surrounding region?
I don't have a percentage in mind, but definitely trafficking is a problem, and not only here in the United States, but all over the world. And the difficulty with this crime is it's so secretive, right? Victims are kept in isolation. They often don't speak English, so they're kept very isolated. So they have difficulties knowing about the National Immigrant Justice Center or other organizations that can assist them. But I think part of the reason why we eventually do get clients is because they eventually are able to escape that situation and find other immigrants in the community who have maybe established themselves a bit more and who can direct them to those services.
Okay, and certainly one of the, I guess, more tragic aspects of human trafficking is also sex trafficking. Do you deal with some of that too, or do you work with organizations that deal with that issue specifically?
With sex trafficking, sure, yes. And actually, at the beginning of this fall at NIJC, we're going to have a fellow who's going to be dealing specifically with the subject of trafficking and trying to develop resources and further provide services to this population of immigrants.
Okay. Now let's switch gears a bit. You work a lot in the legal area, and you're a lawyer yourself. Tell me about the Defenders Initiative and what that is and what it provides for people in the community or in the legal community that might want to work or become more familiar with what's going on and with the work that National Immigrant Justice Center does.
Sure. Actually, the work of the Defenders Initiative is really important because it provides a front line to public defenders or criminal defense attorneys who are working either with an undocumented client or with a lawful permanent resident client. A lot of our lawful permanent resident clients don't understand or don't know that if they commit a certain crime and are convicted of that crime, their status is put into jeopardy and they could be placed in removal proceedings.
Like what, for example, what could put a person into jeopardy? Can you add to some of that, Cindy?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've been seeing a lot right now, especially right with the rising number of deportations, is people being put into removal proceedings for driving without a license or not stopping at a stop sign. With crime and
something as simple as that.
Something as simple as that, yeah, especially in certain areas where they have secure communities where local law enforcement agencies share fingerprints with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. If someone that is undocumented shares their fingerprints, they may say, hey, you're undocumented, we need to keep you here, and that's how the process begins.
Wow. So these are secure communities. That's the label that they use for themselves.
Secure communities is one of the enforcement programs that's used by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement.
And here in Illinois, do we have a lot of those communities that decide to become a part of that?
So I think in the collar counties or southern Illinois, it's more common for police enforcement to communicate more directly with ICE. Here in Cook County and in other counties that are close to the city, they've been great in that they don't participate in secure communities, and it's something that we're constantly fighting against.
Okay, so just so I can get a full understanding of that, and our viewers can as well. So secure communities, that means law enforcement will, if they find somebody that's undocumented or they pull somebody over that's undocumented, they will hold them? Is that how it is?
So when someone's arrested, they have their fingerprints taken and they're put into a system that's shared with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement so that they are put on notice that the undocumented person is being held in jail by the local law enforcement agency. Now there is something called an immigration hold, which is once an immigrant, an undocumented or permanent resident is arrested, local law enforcement is supposed to hold the person for 48 hours so that ICE can come and process them and decide what to do with the individual or let them go. So there's been a lot of pushback in Cook County and in other counties and in other states really all over the country where they're saying that participating with that immigration hold is not mandatory, that they won't keep a person more than 48 hours, and they'll only do so if it's a significant crime. They're
Okay.
unwilling to hold someone for a traffic offense.
Right. Yeah, and something as simple as that
Right.
could become quite, I mean, really for a family, a tragic situation, an incredibly difficult situation.
Right. And just to roll back to the Defenders Initiative,
Right,
so the importance of this initiative is that when an immigrant is arrested, depending on what the charge is, really the first step that the defense attorney, whether it be a public defender or a private criminal defense attorney, is that attorney should inquire as to their client's status, right? And the second step is that attorney should contact an immigration attorney to see how a certain plea or a certain conviction could affect that person's immigration status.
Okay.
So the Defenders Initiative, we have a number, an email address where these defenders can contact our organization and inquire as to the effects of a particular charge.
And that information, at least to contact you, is available on your website, right?
Exactly right.
You can make a call or send an email.
Right.
Okay. I'm curious. Do you get a lot of response from public defenders here in the area, in our region?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what are the most common questions you get?
I think there are other attorneys that deal with this project in particular, but a lot of the inquiries that they receive have to do with drug crimes and the effect of a drug conviction. Also potentially with fraud-related charges and how that could affect an individual.
Now, fraud comes into the using of other person's social security number a lot. Is that one of the areas?
It certainly is. There's a distinction between possession of a social security number and use of a social security number. So there's all these nuances, right, in criminal law and how immigration law are interrelate.
Okay. Did you want to add something, Cindy?
I mean, I think, what Vanessa shared covers a lot of the work that we do. I mean, NIJC is a great resource to the immigrant community in Chicago and Illinois and some of the surrounding states. So I definitely encourage, our viewers to contact us if they have any questions or concerns.
What if somebody's a minor and they get pulled over for a traffic offense and they're undocumented and they don't have DACA status or a license? Well, just give me an example. What might be a recourse for them?
So it's difficult to know.
Specifically?
Certainly, the individual could potentially be referred to immigration for initiation of proceedings, but I think that ICE would take into account that they're a minor.
Okay.
But as soon as that happens, that juvenile's family should definitely contact an attorney or an accredited organization, BIA accredited organization, so that we can assess for DACA eligibility and get that on file right away if that's the case.
Okay, great. Also, I'm curious, you must work with consulates from other countries because of the nature of your work. Aren't police required, if they're arresting somebody, for a national to contact or to provide that connection with the person's consulate?
I'm unaware if it occurs at the time of arrest, but certainly if an immigrant is in immigration detention and if they're about to be deported, ICE will contact the consulate to try and have the consulate produce a travel document for the individual. And that's at the point too where some of the consulates really try to intervene and see if there's anything that could be done to prevent their nationals' deportation.
Okay.
And the Mexican consulate is one that we work with in particular that's really great about public education, about offering resources to their nationals.
Yeah, we kind of have to be such a large group.
Right. Exactly right.
So let's move on. You guys do so much work that I want to touch on everything, and then we can get into DACA. How difficult is it for, especially given the past decade in Mexico and Central America with a lot of the crime and violence in certain areas? how difficult is it for people coming from those countries to seek asylum here, or from other countries to seek asylum? Is it an easy process? What happens? Talk to me about that.
So seeking asylum is actually a really intimidating process, and it's a difficult process. When somebody shows up at our border and expresses a fear of returning to their home country, they're supposed to be interviewed by an immigration official to determine if there's any credibility to that claim, so that the person can then be placed in removal proceedings to then file their application for their defensive application for asylum. During this entire time that they're putting their application forward, the individual could be detained the entire time. Now imagine somebody who's escaping torture from their home country, imprisonment, wrongful imprisonment, and to be put in a situation where they're detained. There's issues with post-traumatic stress disorder, among many other issues with this process. The other difficulty with seeking asylum in the United States is, there's some individuals who are already here in the country, and the situation in their home country may have changed, such that they fear returning.
Okay.
Right? Unfortunately, under immigration law, there's a 1-year deadline to applying for asylum after the individual enters the United States. Now, there's an exception to that rule if the individual can establish that there's exceptional circumstances as to why they didn't apply. But that's also another barrier, because someone who comes to this country doesn't necessarily know these rules, that they have 1 year.
Right.
So it's definitely a difficult and intimidating process.
So if our viewers know of anybody that might need those services, they should obviously contact you. And
yes, among the projects that we have at NIJC, there's an asylum project.
okay, great. Now let's finally get to DACA and what it is, what it provides. I know it's been around for a couple of years now. Cindy, tell us what DACA means, first of all, how it came about, and how people go about getting this status. And now they're up for renewal, right?
Yeah, so deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, is an answer to to a lot of immigrant situations here in the U.S. I mean, we've been, as the immigrant community advocates, we've been trying to push for some type of legislation that will give undocumented people a pathway to citizenship or residency here in the U.S., and we haven't been successful in passing anything similar to that in many years. Deferred action is a program under the Obama administration that allows certain undocumented young people or people who came here as children to apply for deferred action, meaning that they are low priority for immigration and customs enforcement. And with that, they can get a work permit that's valid for 2 years. With the work permit, you are able to get your social security number, and in most states here in the United States, you can get a driver's license, state ID, and now more opportunities are opening up to DACA-mented youth, which is the term that we use now, including educational opportunities, more access to scholarships. They're still not eligible to apply for federal or state financial aid.
Right, but still filling out the FAFSA.
Yeah, so they still should not do that, but there are more scholarships that used to only be open to lawful permanent residents or U.S. citizens that now accept DACA, DACA-mented students. Okay,
so let's say I'm a young person who was brought here by my parents, and I want to apply for DACA status. Take me through that process.
Yeah. So the eligibility requirements are strict. Only certain young people that came here as children are eligible. The person should have arrived here before they turned 16 years of age. Should prove continuous presence since June 15, 2007, and prove that they were here on June 15, 2012 when the announcement was made. It's a very long process because you have to show paperwork for your continuous presence, including medical records, school records, any kind of record that you can find.
Dental records?
Anything that you find.
Really? Wait, because it is a medical
you
record.
need to prove that that you've been here for that long.
Right.
And then there are some there is an age limit, so you should have been under the age of 31 when the announcement was made. So there are a few people out there who have been here since they were children,
Right.
but they just didn't meet that requirement.
Because they're above that age.
Yeah.
Wow.
And certain convictions, certain misdemeanors will disqualify you. For example, a DUI would disqualify someone from qualifying for deferred action. If someone is not sure if they qualify, they should definitely seek out an attorney or an organization like ours and ask, for a legal assessment and make sure that they do qualify before they apply. If it turns out that they qualify, then we start the process of getting all your paperwork in order. You have to prove that you're still in high school, or you graduated from high school, or are in the process, or received your GED. So that requires contacting the schools that you've attended, getting your transcripts, getting copies of your birth certificate, getting copies of your passport or matricula if you have one, getting copies of all your records from the last since at least 2007. So it's a long process, just finding all of that paperwork sometimes, especially for those young people who haven't been in school after high school, and they've been working, or they've and they've been getting paid under the table, which is another obstacle. Once we have all of that in, you submit your application, and you get your biometrics notice.
That term to me sounds scary, especially given the whole NSA spying on people and everything, and on our emails. Tell us what the whole biometrics process is for DACA.
Yeah, so first of all, it's very, very important that anyone that's applying for an immigration benefit be honest with their attorney or their legal representative, especially regarding convictions or crimes, any arrests that they've had, because they will be taking their fingerprints in the future. And if something comes up that wasn't included in the application, it would be misrepresentation of information for immigration purposes. The biometrics appointment, at least from my own experience, it was a very short appointment. They take your fingerprints of all 10 fingers, and then they take your picture. You do need to have a photo ID with you, passport, matricula, or school ID if you're still in high school. And if it's clear and everything is fine, you don't have, if you're not a threat to national security, within a few months you would get your approval for deferred action.
And I'm sorry, the only other thing I would add to the eligibility requirements is that the applicant has to be at least 15 years old in order to apply. They could be younger than 15 if they're currently in removal proceedings.
Okay, okay. That means that they want to just deport them. Or
If the legal judicial process for deportation has already commenced, so they're in front of an immigration judge, the individual can apply earlier than 15 years old.
Okay, okay. Now people are up for renewal, so DACA isn't forever, right?
No.
So now how does the renewal process work?
Yes, so it is recommended that DACA-mentored young people apply for their renewal, renewing their DACA and their work permit at least 4 to 5 months before it expires. The reason for that is we want to avoid having any gaps between our deferred action status and our work permit. There may be workplaces that would say, hey, your work permit is not valid anymore. We can't keep working with you right now, so come back later. And so that we want to avoid any hassles relating to that.
So you do want to encourage people to start early, the renewal?
Between 4 to 5 months. NIJC will be having DACA renewal clinics every month. And DACA clinics for those that are applying for the first time. I would just recommend that they keep track of when their work permit, their deferred action status will expire, and be ready to go. The process seems to be easier, not as much paperwork as the initial process, but USCIS still has not released the official application yet, but I recommend everyone to keep an eye out, keep checking the website, keep checking organizations that are advocating for immigrants for any updates that may come in the next few days, next couple of weeks.
Right, and so that 4 to 5 month period is the ideal time to apply, as Cindy mentioned, because that's the window where USCIS has said to
What
us.
is USCIS?
USCIS is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Okay.
It's the body or agency under the Department of Homeland Security that adjudicates the DACA applications.
Okay.
And so USCIS has said that people who apply during this window of time, they believe that they will give the decision before the individual's current DACA status expires,
Okay.
so that, as Cindy mentioned, there's no lapse.
Mm-hmm.
The other difficulty with a potential lapse is that the individual will accrue unlawful presence, besides not being able to work.
Right.
So unlawful presence comes into play if the individual is ever eligible for a more permanent form of relief.
Wow.
And so one of the things that we do want to encourage people, you know, a lot of the applicants that we've seen through our DACA clinics, which to date from September 2012 to the present, we've been able to help over 750 youth through our pro bono clinics.
Okay.
And this is really the first time that they're applying for any immigration benefit or speaking to an immigration attorney. And we have found that 15% of those applicants are actually eligible for a more permanent form of relief.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So it's vital that individuals who still haven't applied initially for DACA come forward and at least get the consultation.
Okay.
Speak to an attorney and a creditor representative and get that consultation, because you may be eligible for something that not only benefits yourself but your family members as well.
Well, that's a great point to end on. You know, we're out of time, and there's so much to cover. But yeah, people should go to your website and contact you for further questions and any concerns they might have. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to you, our audience, thank you for joining us. Perspectivas Latinas is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Perspectivas Latinas for local issues and concerns every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.